Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished and honored guests. Welcome to the Embassy Speaker Series. Please welcome Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Canada, His Excellency Cho Hee-young, for the opening remarks.
Good evening, esteemed Korean War veterans, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First, thank you very much for your participation in the Embassy Speakers Series this evening. As you are well aware, this year is very special momentum for both Canada and Korea. Our two governments have declared this year, 2013, to be the year of Korea in Canada and the year of Canada in Korea. And in addition, the Veteran Affairs Canada also designated this year as Year of Korean War Veteran. In honor of this very special momentum, and to share the wisdom and perspectives of some special dignitaries who have long been engaged in the relations between Canada and Korea, the embassy has planned this program. So today, as for me, it is a great honor and privilege to host the first event in this program. The perspectives on the Korean War was chosen as the topic for the first speaker series, since the special relationship, the special partnership which we are enjoying today as staunch allies, ideal partners, and like-minded countries is deeply rooted in our invaluable sacrifices and tremendous contribution of Korean war veterans. We are very honored to have an impressive panel of speakers. The General Ramsey with us, a former Chief of the Defense Staff, Mr. Jennekens, a former President and CEO of the Atomic Energy Control Board, as well as a distinguished professional engineer, and Mr. Kendrick, a true member of the Canadian Forces, who served for 5 years in the Navy, 25 years in the Air Force, and retired as the Director of Identification Service at National Defense. These three speakers generously agreed to share their remarkable experiences and unique knowledge about Korea with us. Thank you again for your gracious acceptance our invitation to speak tonight. As well, I'd like to express my deep thanks to all Korean veterans who are also honoring us with their presence, including Admiral Bill Christie and retired Deputy Minister Charles Nixon and General Belzile. As some of you have already witnessed through your visit to Korea, the Korea that Korean War veterans defended has been experienced tremendous changes. Korea has become one of the most prosperous countries in the international community. Korea has become full-fledged democracy and transformed from an aid recipient to a donor country for a rather short time in the international community. And on top of that, Korea has emerged the world's the 15th largest economy and proud to become a member of OECD and G20. The Korea's progress and advancement in the international community could not have happened without the invariable contribution and long and constructive engagement of Canada for more than 6 decades. So we Koreans fully recognize that Korean war veterans has been an anchor in relations between our two countries. So on the occasion of 60th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice, we are going to have a series of events and gatherings to deliver the Korean people's deep thanks and appreciation to the Korean war veterans, their families, and the ever supportive Canadian public. Finally, I'd like to say that we all participants here will learn a great deal about unique perspectives of the speakers on serving in the Canadian military to defend a country they never knew, defend the people they never met. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now begin the lectures. So please join me in a warm round of applause for our moderator today, Mr. John Jennekens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador and Chow. As I look around the room, I see about 80 distinguished guests. We, my colleagues and I, feel very privileged to have been invited by Ambassador Chow to come and share with you some of our knowledge and experiences while serving in Korea. Well, in the context of global affairs, the decade 1938 to 1948 was of momentous importance to the entire world community. For the Republic of Korea and Canada, certain of these events were of particular significance. In July 1948, the Dominion of Newfoundland voted in favor of becoming Canada's 10th province. In August of 1948, the Republic of Korea was established, and later, in December of 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations declared the government of the Republic of Korea as a lawful government and the only government in Korea. 7 years earlier, in 1941, Koreans were stoically withstanding the emotional and physical maltreatment, indignities, and moral oppression resulting from the forceful and ruthless imposition of colonial rule initiated by Japan in 1910. Throughout the peninsula and the coastal islands, Koreans maintained their dignity and their determination to persevere. They were inspired by their inherent egalitarian instincts. Instincts that dated back to prehistoric times, long preceding the historically recorded founding of Korea in 2333 BC. Most Koreans, and possibly many others, were unaware of the June 21st Inter-Allied Declaration to work together with other free peoples, both in war and in peace. A few months later, January the 1st, 1942, the 26 Allied nations that had joined together to defeat the Axis powers declared that they wanted to create a new post-war world body, which President Roosevelt referred to as the United Nations. On the 25th of June, 1945, in San Francisco, 50 nations declared their approval of the Charter of the United Nations. 50. Today there are 193 members of the UN. Well, the creation of the United Nations was especially important to Koreans because immediately following the defeat of Japan, the United States and the Soviet Union, with a tacit approval of the United States and the Republic of China, had agreed to unilaterally divide the Korean Peninsula into the north and the south. The United States and the Soviet Union quickly sent armed forces into the two parts of Korea, ostensibly to enable the two Koreas then to return to a democratic form of government. One of the many consequences of Japan's tyrannical colonial rule was the emergency of more than 100 different political factions. Factions that had bravely fought against the Japanese during the occupation. Those factions had very diverse views, political views, about how a country should be governed. In February of 1945, the Western Allies at the Yalta Conference agreed to negotiate with the Soviet Union the declaration of what were referred to as buffer zones, satellite countries answerable to Moscow. Well, the Soviet Union, by prior agreement with its allies and the United States, immediately occupied north of the 38th parallel. But they awaited at the 38th parallel the arrival of United States forces coming from the south. They then agreed to look after South and North Korea. Syngman Rhee, a very popular South Korean, later South Korean, now South Korean leader, was elected president of the newly proclaimed Republic of Korea in August of 1948. Meanwhile, Kim Il-sung, and that was not his birth name. His birth name was Kim Jong-ju, but he adopted the name Kim Il-sung because Kim Il-sung was a very well-known Korean hero during the Japanese occupation. And he was elected premier of the newly proclaimed Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He was a physically strong, a very personable, and intellectually very bright individual. And with the assistance of some of his Chinese and Soviet friends, was able, with his wife, to flee to Moscow, where he was treated very hospitably by the Soviet Union. He was enrolled in university and in the Soviet Army. And by 1943, he had attained the rank of Capitan. Well, as I mentioned, 48 was a year of great significance. In June of 1948, the Soviet Union initiated the Berlin blockade, endeavoring to prevent the Western Allies from supporting West Berlin by canal, by road, and by rail. Thankfully, the Air Forces, criminally, the Air Forces of the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa provided what was referred to as the Berlin airlift. And so the Soviet attempt to blockade Berlin proved to be unsuccessful. To the surprise of many observers, in December of 1948, the Soviet Union withdrew all of its troops from North Korea. It had become preoccupied with what became known as the Cold War. But it also was very impressed by the ability of its Chinese fellow communist allies to support North Korea. At the same time, the Americans decided to withdraw almost all of their troops, certainly all of their fighting troops. Now, before leaving North Korea, the Soviet Union had supplied the North Korean army with heavy artillery and what has been universally declared as the best all-around medium tank, battle tank of the Second World War, the T-34. Somewhat differently, the Americans had decided only to supply South Korea with what we in the military refer to as small arms and a few reconnaissance and training aircraft. Well, many Koreans had supported Mao Zedong and his followers in fighting the Kuomintang forces led by Chiang Kai-shek. And when Chiang Kai-shek and his forces departed mainland China and fled to Taiwan, Chairman Mao thanked his Korean allies and asked them to return to North Korea, 100,000 strong. And with them went 12,000 Chinese veterans. So by 1950, North Korea had an army of about 150,000, 90,000 of whom were combat trained. At 0400 hours, which to civilians is 4 o'clock in the morning, the DPRK invaded South Korea. The United States and the United Kingdom and the Republic of China and France immediately responded by calling an emergency session of the UN Security Council. Now, at that time, the Soviet Union was boycotting the Security Council meetings because it had asked its other members, except the Republic of China, of course, to agree to admit the People's Republic of China as a member of the Security Council, one of the 5 members of the Security Council. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Republic of China said no. So the Soviet Union boycotted the meetings, and the 5 permanent members, sorry, that's 4.5, 5. The 5 permanent members have a veto power, but the Soviet Union was absent. And so when the United States and the United Kingdom introduced the first of 3 resolutions, the Soviet Union was not there to veto it. Immediately, a number of members of the United Nations, Canada being one of the first, declared their intention to support South Korea, and within a few days, 3 destroyers of the Royal Canadian Navy were ordered to prepare to set sail for Korea. And that gives me an opportunity to invite my comrade, Dan Kendrick, former of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force, to address you.
I've been a member of the project, a member of the Memory Project for quite a few years now. And during Remembrance Week, I normally speak to, have been speaking to a bunch of students, classes, and other organizations, none quite as old as the group I have here tonight. It's a pleasure, though. And I'm happy to say that I'm one of the ones that made it back from Korea. I often talk to when I'm talking to the youth, and I tell them that we served in the war in Korea because we don't like schoolyard bullies. And that was what I always thought, that I was helping to make sure that the schoolyard bullies didn't get South Korea taken over. As John was saying, in 5th of July 1950, I was in HMCS Navy, which is a training station in Victoria, BC, on a course when the first 3 destroyers left, the Athabaskan, the Sioux, and the Cayuga. And I watched them go to the harbor. And I was sort of a little upset that I wasn't one of the ones going as well. So I had to stay there until they got enough personnel back into manning the unit, and then I went back to my home port on the East Coast. I sailed on quite a few ships before I eventually got posted on to HMCS Huron. During the Korean War, there were 8 Canadian destroyers served there. There were always 3 destroyers in the Korean waters. The one ship that had lost some of their crew was the Iroquois in 1952, and 3 of the sailors were killed and 10 were wounded. There was also 5 lost at sea during their time there, and last year they put their names on the memorial in Korea. When the different ships, the Haida, for example, served 2 tours in Korea. The Huron served 3 tours in Korea. I was on the middle one. The Iroquois spent 3 tours, and the Nootka spent 2. There's 3,621 officers and men of the Navy served in Korea. We left Halifax on the 29th of April, 1953, and I left my wife with a new child and pregnant while I took off to go to Korea. Our wives taken off a lot of pressure and some of the things. One of the things I really think about is the time that when we ran aground in Korea, they never knew until they heard it on the radio or in the newspaper. Nobody came to visit them or tell them that something had happened, whether any of us were dead or what was going on. We left for Korea and we sailed through the Panama Canal and over to Hawaii, and in Pearl Harbor we did our workups with the American Navy. And then we sailed on to Kwajalein and Guam and into Sasebo, Japan, which was our home port. And we started our tours on the Korean coast, and the first tour we did was with the aircraft carriers, Virilko and the Ocean, HMS Ocean and the USS Virilko. What we did was sort of defended the aircraft carriers in case of attack from shore or ships or mines or whatever. So we'd do 1 month doing that duty and picking up some of the aircraft crew that didn't make it back on board the ship. We would pick them up and turn them over to them. And we go back into Sasebo, and I was talking to somebody recently, and I thought we went back there for about 5 days, but in fact it was 2 days. And then we were back on the other coast doing what we all like to do and think we're doing, train busting, and look at and assisting the Army and looking after the islands and shore posts that the Army was coming in on. And the train busting was really something. I remember the first time at night, it's all dark, and they run the engines, or they shut everything down and run, as we called it, run silent along the coast, and you'd watch, and they would fire if anybody heard a noise from the land, a train whistle or anything, you'd pass the word up, and they fired a star shell. And the first time I ever saw a star shell, wow, I never knew that thing could lighten up the area as it did. It's phosphorus, and it's fired into the air, and as it comes down, it's on a parachute. It just lights everything up. And as soon as they would see a train, they'd try and shoot it before it got into the tunnel. And the trains, of course, were carrying ammunition and supplies and personnel down into South Korea for the enemy. Well, we would, and then one of the other jobs we did when we were on that coast was blowing up mines. And I remember we went out, and there was a U.S. minesweeper, and it had located some mines, and we went in and we blew the mines up. And boy, you ever see when you're a kid, you see these things that are mines in water, big round with horns sticking out of them, and you think, wow, that's a little bigger than what I thought they were, and when they go up, boy, they sure blow up. Anyway, we did that, and on the night of the 12th, or the 12th of July, 1953, we were train busting, and then we were refueling, and then we were heading in, when it was dark, about 11 o'clock at night, we were heading for shore. There was an island that we were protecting for UN's help, and the captain, Commander Jennekens, he had been up for a long time, and he finally thought he should go and have a sleep, and he trusted his young lieutenants, and he went in to sleep, and the young lieutenant on the bridge, they told him that he was heading for land, and he said, "You're wrong, you're not with the program, you better get it straight." Well, we were heading for land. We ran aground on Pangyang-do, which was in enemy territory, and it was a good thing there was fog. It was a really heavy fog, because the enemy could have blown us out of the water because we were sitting ducks. And we had to sit there from just after midnight until just after 4 o'clock in the morning. And when we ran aground, a lot of us were wandering around wondering what was going on. But the engineering officer got me to go down into the front of the ship where the damage was, and I went down in to look at it, and I'll never forget that, looking at all this black water and great big black rocks sticking up inside the ship. I went back up and told him what it was. So there was the engineering officer and the chief ERA and Stoker and myself and a couple others. They had me look after the evaporator, which is making fresh water out of seawater, and I ran it, and the started to try and pull ourselves off the rocks with both engines, and that wasn't working, so they shut the one engine down and got the other one up to full steam and pulled one way and then shut it down. And we wiggled ourselves off the rocks before 4:30 in the morning and got around before the fog lifted, and we tried to shore up the damage that had been done. Then we tried to go ahead to get back to Sasebo, and the plates were being ripped back because of the forward thrust on them, the forward movement of the ship. So the USS Baruco, there was two American ocean-going tugs, and they tried to pull the Aztec dome off. It had gone down. It's at the bottom of the ship near the front, and it had dropped. And this was blocking us from getting onto a land-sea dock. They put a ship. It's a great big ship, and it's really something to see. They sink it. And all you can see is the tower of it, and they tried to get us up on that. And because of this dome being down there, we couldn't. So they tried to blast it. They sent a diver down and put dynamite on it and tried to blast it off, and that sort of shakes us. And then they put a wire on it, a big tow line, and took off this tug, and it tried to pull it off, and we thought the whole front end was going. Anyway, we went all the way astern by tug from Korea back to Sasebo, Japan, 5 days going astern. The bearings couldn't stand that. We got just into the outside of the harbor in Sasebo, and the Captain Jennekens said, "We're not going in under tug, we're going in on our own." And there was a couple of pictures that I, on the memory project, one is, that's another friend. That's 60 years ago. That's a friend, and my friend lives in Port Dover, Ontario, and he's one of the ones that gets asked about where we were, what we were doing, and he always comes to me and Dan will know where it is, or what we were doing. We were in a pub in Sasebo, Japan in 1953, having beer. And there's, this is, when we got to outside Sasebo Harbor, you can tell the front of the ship. It's the water, we're going in on our own. It's not plowing the water the way that it should. But we were going in on our own. We weren't taking anybody's tow job. And then this is the damage. Yeah, when we ran aground, we went up, I guess, and come right down, but it smashed all this. And there's some of the crew quarters are up in that front part. And imagine when I went down in there and looked, and all I could see was all this water. And that's a paint blocker on that. So they took, the crew started working while we were trying to work ourselves off, and they took all the ammunition from the ammunition lockers and that from the front end and back, and loaded it onto the back. We dropped our anchors, they're still there. I wonder if anybody's ever gone back for scrap, but yeah, they're still there off Penang Do. And this is the log that I kept. I get told that I should never have done this, but anyway, well, I can tell you who was on duty and when they were on duty. Rye, of course, was a chap that worked with me, and that's his signature over there. His name is Rycroft. But this record, it's really interesting. All the comments of each of the watchkeepers put their comments in them. It was interesting. Yeah. That last one says the entry on the left page says run aground at 0038, main engine stopped at 0039. come off on our own power. This was one of the chaps that wrote a book here in Ottawa. He's here, and this friend of mine said, you better phone him and tell him he's wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Because he put in the book that we were pulled off the rocks by tugboats. And we weren't. We got off on our own power. And when I meet any Navy personnel, I always like to rub them a little bit and tell them that I've got more time to go on the stern than they have going ahead. After we spent 3 months in Sasebo Dry Dock, and they put us, this will surprise some people, they put a cement hull in there. They filled that with cement and fixed us up so we could get back to sea. We went back and we carried on after that, after we got fixed up and we started doing our duties, but then the ceasefire had gone into effect and we were doing the same type of thing. We would patrol both coasts to just make sure that the enemy didn't start up again, or if they did, we were there to protect them. And then we left Korea. We were replaced, I think, by the Iroquois. And we headed back, and we went to Hong Kong and Singapore and Ceylon, and back through the Suez Canal. So I lost a day of my life. I circumnavigated the world. We didn't go back the other way. And a funny experience happened to us. Sort of, there's some things you remember. And we were going through the Suez Canal, and there was a bit of tension in the Suez at that time. But we, in the sandstorms, the canal gets a lot of sand. And we were navigating through, and we got stuck on the side. So they put a diver went down to see what was going on, and the passenger liner was coming along. Well, they pulled the Canadian flag down and put the British flag up. And then we went into Malta, and then into Singapore, and then back across the Azores and back home. It was a real, when you think back now, and I hear of all the things that have happened in South Korea and how they won, makes you feel really proud that you helped somebody fight a schoolyard bully.
So that was 1950 to 1953. And now General Withers will cover some of that period up until the end of 1953.
Well, I started out, as some here know, graduating from the Royal Military College on the 3rd of June, 1952, and immediately packed my bags and headed to Korea, where I was a signal officer with the Premier Bataillon du Royal 22e Régiment, and I spent some time as a ground pounder in the infantry. But let me just go through now how the battle ensued up to the fall of 1950. Now, as this may be a little hard to see, however, the red indicates the onslaught of the North Korean forces against, as you know, a very weak force, brave but weak, unique. No heavy weapons, but the way that they fought, and it was amazing what they achieved, but they eventually were thrown back to what is known as the Busan perimeter, and that was by the fall of 1950, just a matter of a few months. And then something quite daring occurred. And as I tell people, it would be almost impossible today to do what the Americans did. By the 15th of September 1950, they landed a Marine division and an Army division at Incheon. The 15th of September, just think about that. That was, you had to assemble landing craft. How could they do it? Well, they could do it because of all the ships they had put in mothballs at the end of the Pacific War. And they could do it because of all the veterans that they had available to recall in both the Marines and the Army to put in those two divisions. Of course, that essentially cut off the North Korean forces. And it was also during this period that the UN forces started to gain strength. 15 nations answered the call to provide combat troops. And I'll name them very, very quickly, and you're going to be interested in some of the names. Some of the names you would say yes, of course. Others, they did. I mentioned them in alphabetical order. Australia, Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Ethiopia, France, the UK, Greece, Luxembourg. Luxembourg provided a platoon in the French battalion. The Netherlands, New Zealand, the Philippines, South Africa, Thailand, and Turkey. And so as this force grew in strength, they were able to advance to a position that you can see, that if you could pick up the blue line, the UN force advanced up near beyond Pyongyang and almost up to the Yellow River. And by the fall of 1950, they were there. And people were saying, oh, it will be over by Christmas. Now, let me go back to tell you what was happening here in Canada during that time. By the time, as you know, we initially and immediately sent 3 destroyers. They were ready to go. The Air Force had a transport squadron, 426 squadron, that was ready to go, and it went. We didn't send an Air Force fighter squadron like South Africa did. And the main reason was at the same time as we were building up forces to go to Korea, NATO was being formed. And the big job for the Air Force was to send an air division of 200 F-86 aircraft to Europe. As a matter of fact, at that stage in the NATO build-up, Canada had the second largest air force in Europe. But we did have, by the way, 22 Canadian fighter pilots who flew with the U.S. Air Force. And one of them still alive and living here in Ottawa is Claude Lafrance, a Major General retired. And Claude wears the United States Distinguished Flying Cross, and he is credited with 1.5 MiGs. Now, the Army. The Army was tiny. We had a brigade, which we called the Defence of Canada Brigade, and the actual fighting strength of the Canadian Army on the 8th of August 1950 was 17,000. What a reduction from 1st Canadian Field Army in Northwest Europe. So what we had to do, the government said, we shall raise a brigade group to go to Korea, and in the meantime we'll prepare a division to serve in NATO. So this 17,000 combat troop strength of the Canadian Army was going to be tripled, if not quadrupled, in almost no time. It was achieved. And the brigade group was trained, and the first unit of it was the 2nd Battalion of Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, arriving in Korea in February 1951. And by that time, we've got something more happening there. And this is the Chinese intervention. Now, as the UN forces approached the Yellow River, of course, Chairman Mao could not possibly stand the thought that the United States troops would be on the border of his land. And so, a very mighty force. There's a lot of discussion as to what the strength was. Some say 200,000, some say up to 350,000, were attacked the UN forces starting in October 1950 and drove them south. By the way, Canadian destroyers were involved in a very valorous action on the east coast. If you can see where at Wonsan up there, the evacuation of the U.S. Army Corps from there, and a Canadian naval officer, Captain Jeffrey Van Stone Brock, was the UN force commander for that, of the warships supporting that evacuation. But the UN forces were not ready, and they were repulsed, and eventually things started to stabilize in March, April of 1951 on this line shown here. And that is when the 1st Canadian Battalion to enter battle, 2nd Patricias, had a very demanding task to do. And the Battle of Capiam is something that goes down in Canadian history and has been very well recognized by our comrades in the Republic of Korea as well, because whereas Canada had put up a memorial there, Korea had. Then the Patricians did their own. But anyway, what happened in that battle was the Patricians were on Hill 677 at Capiam, that's 677 meters high. And it controlled the Capiam River route, which eventually down here 40 kilometers away reaches Seoul. And the Chinese had to be stopped at that point, or they would have captured Seoul yet once again. And so the UN force said, this is it, we're going to stop them here. And unfortunately, on the right of the Patricias, the Australian battalion, supported by Philippine troops there, they actually ran out of ammunition and had to leave, as did the British units on the other side of the Patricias. And so the Patricias were totally surrounded. And the only way that they could be resupplied was by airdrop. And as a matter, and I urge all of you who have not yet visited our wonderful Canadian War Museum to do so, and to look in Gallery 4 and see Ted Zuber's magnificent painting there of the Patricias at Capiam, and with the U.S. Air Force accurately delivering supplies over top. But somewhere between 400 and 450 Patricias on that hill withstood the attack of 6,000 Chinese troops. And they held until they were relieved. This was a turning point of the whole war. The Patricias, just to give you an idea of the casualties, Patricias had 10 killed and 23 wounded. Chinese casualties were 3,000. And it was a turning point because the Chinese commanders finally realized that they were not going to succeed in imposing their will on the southern part of the peninsula. And so peace talks started in earnest at that point. Now the Patricias' action was so highly regarded by someone named President Harry S. Truman that the Patricias were awarded the United States Distinguished Unit Citation, the only Canadian unit to have that great distinction. Well, then the UN forces started the march back until they reached positions that were, it's going to be hard to see here, but just north of the 38th parallel, and that is when the peace talks really, as I say, started in earnest. That was about the time that also in the starting the end of 1951 and into 1952, that the Canadian brigade was rotated, and a new brigade came in. The 2nd battalions of the 3 infantry regiments were replaced by their 1st battalions. And it was a period of static warfare. Our battalion, as a matter of fact, to give you an idea of what it was like, one period we were in the line longer than any Canadian battalion had ever been. 91 days. We went in with 4 rifle companies and came out with 3. So while it was a static war, it was not a very nice one. But fortunately, what happened on the 27th of July, 1953, was that the fighting stopped. And as you undoubtedly know, there is no peace treaty yet. However, the fighting did stop, and stability was restored. And I want to show you a picture of what I saw, how I saw Seoul when I arrived in 1952. When I went back in 1983, my wife and I stayed in a 45-story hotel. It was wonderful to see. And so, what I can say on behalf of the 27,000 Canadians who served, I can say that it is our thrill to see what has happened. And I would like to quote from our official history that was published by the Army Historical Section here in 1956. Canada made a larger contribution in proportion to her population than most of the nations which provided troops for the international force. It is worth remembering that, on this basis, a brigade group from Canada was almost equivalent to 4 of the divisions sent to Korea from the United States. The United States, which in 1950 had 11 times Canada's population. We paid a price. 516 killed in action, of whom 386 are buried in the UN cemetery in Busan. And now I would like to also quote the final paragraph from that same official history. The Canadians who fell in Korea gave their lives to one of the best causes for which men have ever sacrificed themselves. If, as the old Romans said, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, it is certainly no less fitting to die for the future of mankind. And I want to say that my family has a very personal relationship today in the Republic of Korea. And I'd like to show you a picture. And this is my granddaughter Lauren putting flowers on the grave of my classmate and friend Arthur Herman from our battalion, who was killed on the 19th of August 1952. Thank you very much.
Well, there are a few drops of water here. And there, as Ramsey has recounted some of his recollections. Well, Ramsey's mentioned that July the 27th, 1953 was the day on which the UN High Command and the People's Republic of Korea, the People's Army, signed the Armistice. Ramsey's also mentioned that 516 Canadians gave their lives. as a result of the Korean War. 44 of them died after the armistice. My friend and comrade General Belzile reminded me before the meeting started, he, by the way, served as platoon commander with one of my classmates, Ed Babinski, 2nd Battalion, Queensville Rifles. The three of us were in Korea at the same time. But General Belzile said that his battalion lost 7. Tragically, there were many civilian deaths after the armistice. And that was because as families returned to their villages and farmers wanted to return to what they had done for so many years, some of the paddy fields had not been totally cleared of anti-personnel and anti-tank mines. The loss of a family member for any reason, but particularly due to a senseless, completely without reason or benefit to anyone, is a tragedy of indescribable dimensions. The war in Korea was totally senseless. However, as again General Withers has mentioned, since 1953 there have been a number of very positive developments. Initially, post-war economic development in South Korea proceeded at a very slow pace. However, as successive governments granted more and more freedom, less control over Korean entrepreneurs, the economy of South Korea improved. And this was due to Korean ingenuity, Korean initiative, engineering and multi-science competence, manufacturing skills, and a very fundamental understanding of the meaning of what we engineers call quality assurance. By 2011, South Korea ranked 13th. The ambassador referred to this. 13th in the world out of 214 countries in terms of gross domestic product. Also, in 2011, South Korea was recognized as the 4th largest Asian economy. But that same year, the International Monetary Fund awarded South Korea a very coveted award and recognized it as the 2nd of 4 advanced economies in Asia. Well, realizing that South Korea was a very important ally with mutually agreed dedication to achieving the objectives of the United Nations, the United States set about to help South Korea rebuild its infrastructure in a very similar fashion to a former general, former Secretary of State, George Marshall in Europe, and General MacArthur in Japan did to help Europe, primarily Western Europe, but also parts of Eastern Europe, and Japan to rebuild. Initially, priority was assigned to building again new roads and bridges, but also high priority was assigned to developing an electrical generating and transmission system to supply the rapidly expanding South Korean industry with a necessity of electricity. This was quite a change for a country which for 35 years had been limited, constrained to the agrarian, the farm, the food production support of its oppressor. Well, initially, on the electricity generation side, the first plants that the Americans helped their Korean allies to build were oil-fired. Korea doesn't have any oil. There's very little coal. And so the oil, of course, was supplied from offshore. However, in 1965, the Korean Atomic Energy Commission, the chairman of which was a medical doctor, asked the Director General Sigvard Eklund of the International Atomic Energy Agency to send an advisory team to Korea to help the Koreans decide on where to build their first nuclear electric power station. 4 countries responded: Canada, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Guess who was the lucky Canadian? So to return to Korea in June of 1965, 10 years after I had sailed home on an American troop ship, it was a wonderful experience. Now, Dan had mentioned that he left a pregnant wife and a small child. And Ramsey said that he graduated on the 3rd of June, I think, 1952, from RMC. I graduated on the 31st of May, 1954. My wife and I married on the 5th of June. And 3 weeks later, I was on my way to Korea. There were 19 in my class, one of whom served with General Bazile, Eddie Babinski as platoon commanders. That battalion, the Queen's Own Rifles, returned to Canada in March of 1955. Of the 19 of my class who went to Korea, there was only one guy left. Some of my classmates said, or called my wife and said, well, you know, John volunteered to stay. And that is not quite correct. In August of 1954, the 16 nations and the 4 who had supplied fighting forces and the 4 who had supplied medical personnel had decided to downsize the UN forces. And by October, the first Canadian units were on their way back home. I and a more senior officer, a Captain Grinham, ADL, Alphonse David Lionel, he was called Sam, and I and 60 craftsmen joined an Australian, British, New Zealand, and Canadian infantry field workshop. And I served with that unit for 8 months. Our task was twofold: to support the 2nd Battalion, the Queen's Own Rifles, and to repair and to bring up to Class 1 standards many hundreds of wheeled vehicles, some of which were of World War II origin, others were what were called SMP, Standard Military Pattern, some were CMP, Canadian Military Pattern. And our task was to bring them up to Class 1 condition and turn them over to our South Korean allies. Well, that advisory team, and I've said, and I've learned to be a little more brief in my remarks, but the medical doctor who was the chairman of the Korean Atomic Energy Commission, he was 80 years old. And the 4 of us, well, in 1965, I was still 32, and we all thought, my gosh, he's an old man. 82, 80, soon to be 94. Admiral Christie. Buzz is about a young 85 or 86. So 80, old man. Anyway, we recommended, of all the sites we visited, we recommended only one. On the, you know the coast on the east side of Japan, of Korea, what it's called? It's called a certain sea. It's called the East Sea. Northeast of Busan then it was a village, now it's a small city, Kori, K-O-R-I. And that Kori the Korean Atomic Energy Commission and KEPCO, the Korean Electric Power Company, had decided to build an oil-fired generating station designed by Westinghouse. And for us, the four of us, one of the important things in siting a nuclear plant is to make sure you have standby power. An oil-fired plant, right there, that's the place. So that is what we recommended, and that recommendation was accepted. In 1978, took a long time, 13 years, but Korea 1 went into operation. Today in Korea, there are 20 nuclear electric plants, and last year those 20 plants supplied 45% of all the electricity produced in Korea. KEPCO has 11 more, some already being constructed and planned. So South Korea is well on its way because, again, as I mentioned earlier, engineering competence, science competence, quality assurance. Well, I should mention one other thing. The plants in Korea, 16 of them, of the ones that are operating, are known as LWRs, light water reactors. They are pressurized water reactors. They're not BWRs. The Fukushima 10 were BWRs. BWRs are, well, something else. The absolute best nuclear plant, LWR, PWR design today in the world is a Korean standard nuclear plant. 1,400 megawatts, huge plant. And how do I know that? Well, for 8 years I was privileged to serve 4 years as a member and 4 years as the chairman of Nuclear Safety Advisory Committee to CATO, the Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization. And the Korean standard nuclear plant, number 1. In parallel with what it was doing to try to convince its North Korean cousins to agree to reunification, the Gaesan Industrial Complex, an ancient capital of Korea, was agreed upon in the year 2000. Ever since, the Sunshine Policy of the Republic of Korea, South Korea has been a major contributor of food aid to North Korea. But during all of this effort, South Korean citizens have served the world community in a very exemplary manner. In 2003, Dr. Lee Jong-wook was elected Director General of the World Health Organization. On the 11th of October 2006, the former Foreign Minister of South Korea was elected the Secretary General of the United Nations. And in 2011, the UN General Assembly voted unanimously to re-elect him to a second 5-year term. Well, clearly, the United Nations has been very much involved in the Korean Peninsula. In 1968, the UN General Assembly adopted the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. All of you, I'm sure, have been reading the printed media and listening to the electronic media about what has been going on. Fortunately, one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council that so far has abstained from agreeing to resolutions to apply sanctions to North Korea and I'm referring to the People's Republic of China, has agreed with those sanctions. And pretty obviously, it is unhappy with what North Korea has been doing. And more recently, its third nuclear test, and currently in the last few weeks, what it has been up to. Well, finally, on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to thank Ambassador Chow and his colleagues and all of the staff members here at the embassy, and this young lady who has been instrumental in organizing, advising, and mentoring what we're doing, Dr. Chung, PhD. Mr. Ambassador, if you would forward to your government our very best wishes for success in your continuing effort to reunify Korea. South Koreans' forbearance, humanitarian endeavors, unending kindnesses, patience, and perseverance are an inspiration to us all. Thank you. Now, Mr. Ree, you're going to announce that if the audience would like to ask some questions.
Yes, sir. Thanks to all three of our speakers today for sharing with us their remarkable experiences and inspirational stories. At this moment, as Mr. Jennekens mentioned, we will proceed to a Q&A session. If you have any questions for any of our speakers today, please raise your hand and you may address your questions. Who would like to start? Yes, we have a question in the back. You can stand up. Or come to the front and address your question to the back. Who would you like to address your question to? And I don't think they heard your question, so if you can come up.
I'm actually asking this to all the veterans here, whoever would like to answer, but I was just wondering if how your perspectives on war and the Canadian military in general has changed after your participation in the Korean War and your experiences with your service in the military.
It's modernized considerably, and things that we had to do, like example that we had oil heated boilers and stuff like that, and the engines, and now they don't have a lot of the people that did it then. And the armament has changed completely from when we were there. And when you can send a drone from over to Afghanistan controlled by somebody in California, it makes a big difference compared to what we had. But you still have to have the manpower and dedication of the people in the military, which is still required, in my opinion.
Yes, that's really, nothing has changed in one respect. And that respect is that we maintain our armed forces to protect our freedom. And that's what we did in 1950 to 53, was to protect our freedom, all of us. And that is, I think you will find that yes, the technology has changed, but the basic purpose remains the same.
Thank you.
If it's too much pressure for you to come up front, I will bring the mic to you. Anyone else would like to ask a question for our speaker today? Yes?
I watched the documentary film last year of Horsey Brothers story, and I was wondering if you had any like nightmares or trauma of war after, like Archie.
Post-traumatic stress. This is the principal topic of the day. Did I? No. And it seems to me that there's a lot more of that happening today than it did in our day. And why that is, I don't think I can provide an answer, but certainly it's probably because the way society as a whole has changed and the kind of expectations people have of living a very peaceful life in a country like this, and then going through the trauma of seeing what happens in places like Afghanistan. I might also say that, to point out that post-traumatic stress syndrome doesn't just apply to the military. It's also quite prevalent with emergency medical technicians.
I think there's a lot of people with different personal vibes or whatever, but I remember when we ran around that there was some that were very upset and didn't know what to do and whatever, but there wasn't that many, and I believe the same thing. There seems to be more now, but why I'm not sure. But there's you do what you got to do and you get on with it, and normally those people don't have all that much.
Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Maria Young-Michel. I've been in Canada 40 years. I have to say that I feel very privileged and very honored to have heard your stories. I have, over the years, listened to many stories from Korean War veterans, but I really like to thank yourselves as well as the embassy and the ambassador as well, because this truly has been extremely informative, very moving, and very honorable to have heard your stories. So I would like to thank you very much and your contributions. And I have heard, one quick question, that there was a time, perhaps your colleagues, your friends during the war days, a moment during Christmas when there was silence, a moment of peace, and singing carols. Is that true? Do you remember, recall stories?
I've heard the stories. We were, just brought up, we were anchored off the coast of Korea on Christmas and New Year's. We didn't hear any singing, but they did bring recorded messages from our wives and family and played them to us. But I remember we were anchored off the coast of Korea, hoping that everybody was going to be quiet.
Well, there was an order went out. One of the things I didn't mention, or should have mentioned, was that the Canadian Brigade in due course became part of what was known as the 1st Commonwealth Division, which essentially had a British brigade, a combined British-Australian brigade, and our own brigade, plus artillery regiments from all of these countries. And this was in the Commonwealth Division. And the divisional order went out that we were to remain quiet on the 25th of December. This was during the time of the fighting. One of the companies in my battalion, one of the company commanders, decided that he really should do something fitting for the occasion, and so he sent out a patrol. The position that we were on, which is known as Yongdong, which is on the east side of the Samachon River, and this company commander sent out his a little patrol to give a message to the Chinese. And they stamped in the snow, "Joyeux Noël." Harry Poe.
You would, yeah.
On Christmas Eve, Cayuga was on the East Coast in the train busting operation you mentioned. But because of the visibility, we had to be completely closed up at action stations. So we spent Christmas Eve right through until about 5 o'clock in the morning, all closed up. And then to our great surprise, our eminent supply officer had managed to corral an unbelievable breakfast. You don't have this in the Army, unfortunately, Ramsey. And this was a good Australian breakfast of steak, eggs, and chips with steak, eggs, and chips, a side order of peas. That's good Australian. That was Christmas Day. One more moment. On this matter of post-traumatic stress disorder, I suggested, and it's been written, that this is very much like many other diseases we've had in our societies. We just haven't recognized them. You know, I think back as a boy to the veterans from the First World War. There were an awful lot of those that I could see were suffering. For example, I don't think my father would fall in that category, but one thing I can tell you about all the veterans that I knew of the First World War, they never said a word about it until the Second World War started.
I'm Bob Lee. I was the first resident trade commissioner in Korea, and I remember a very memorable event shortly after the embassy had opened in September of 1973. In November, the PPCLI first memorial, the Capiam Memorial, was unveiled. And it was a beautiful autumn day, and we all from the embassy, we took a picnic lunch, and there was a wonderful, simple but very memorable ceremony with a less elaborate memorial than is there now. And I remember all the villagers there, and everybody was really, well, they were so thankful that the Canadians had been there and did what they did. And to experience that is something that I will always remember. And then it was such a lovely autumn day, and then we had a fine picnic. And the villagers joined us in a wooded area close by. It was a very memorable day.
Hello, everybody. My name is Young Hee Lee. I'm president of Canada-Korea Society. This is a real moment to give us all an opportunity to really pause ourselves and think of our veterans. And when society was created 28 years ago by the first resident Canadian ambassador to Korea, now this is the Ambassador John Stiles. A lot of founding members were Korean War veterans, and some of you all remember that Vincent Bethel and Les Pike is still alive, although quite ill. So I even I remember a lot of those faces. Now I do appreciate the Ambassador Cho's initiative. This is wonderful, as well as the Canadian government Year of Korea, and as well as the Year of Korean Veterans. We remember Korean veterans, and we always try to bring their legacy, their sacrifice, and their achievement come to alive. In these efforts, also with the Canadian Veterans Affairs Canada now, Peter Mills is here. And the War Museum and Canada-Korea Society, along with Embassy and some other collaborating partners, we are actually planning to have a Korean War Veterans Remembrance Weekend event this year from June 21st and to 23rd. So I think that we are all in this, so we feel so wholeheartedly. But very unfortunately, we are losing some of them. A lot of them are not with us. And John Jennekens and I often talked about this. Mr. Jennekens has been co-vice president of Canada-Korea Society, and whenever we have a meetings and we do speak about this, and General Ramsey, Withers, you were a speaker to this society, and I still remember we often talked about this. So what we want is Korean War is not the forgotten war. Of course, when we all go to War Museum, there are so many displays and so on. And we, I'm the one always granting myself to the War Museum officials that you're going to double the size of a Korean War section. So we will do what we can. But I do appreciate with so many people putting their hearts and trying to remember, trying to carry on the legacy, and trying to also to have our youth learn about this, and also the witness that what we are and what the veterans have done, so that they can carry the legacy to their own peers and next generation. So I, as one of in that effort, I appreciate very, very much for everybody's help, and I thank you, all three of you. This has been blessed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John. I go to Carleton University, major in political science. I just want to say thank you for taking your time to share your experience with us in embassy. And this question goes out to all the veterans in the board. At the end of the Korean War, General MacArthur supposedly wanted to continue the war, confident that UN forces could push back the Chinese and North Korean forces back up to Yalu River. In your honest opinion, do you think UN forces withdrew prematurely, or was the separation of North and South Korea best option given the circumstances at the time? Thank you.
Repeat the question. We thought at the time that we should have kept pushing it, and they shouldn't have stopped and let them come back down. But that is above our decision, and they made the decision, and we stuck with it and abided by it.
Yeah, I think that it was generally really wanted, I think, specifically in the United States, that there would be an end to the fighting. Bear in mind, please, that this is only a very short time in reality after the end of the Second World War. And the main aim was achieved, you see. The main aim was not to allow the North to impose its will upon the South. And that, by the way, in terms of the principles of war, and their application, you're not aiming to kill the enemy. You're aiming to impose your will upon the enemy. And that's what they were trying to do, so that after the 38th parallel had been crossed once again, the position, it was clear that that would allow stability to be recreated for the Republic of Korea, and that was the aim, and the aim was achieved.
Okay, one more comment?
Yeah, this may be somewhat controversial, but in my view of things over the years, one of the redeeming features, if there is one, for using the atomic weapons in Japan is that I feel convinced that if they had not been used in Japan and we hadn't seen the horror of them, they would have been used when, as Ramsey showed, North Korea came practically completely down. And the way to stop that, I really feel, and as I say, I have never seen anybody put this in print, but that's my view of the thing, so thank goodness it didn't happen.
Okay, we will now proceed to the presentation of the commemorative plaques to our three speakers today. So speakers, please come to the front to receive your plaques.
This is for you.
Thank you very, very much.
Yep, and
Would you please
please come forward for a brief.
Very good. Okay. Hello.
And before we conclude, I would like to invite representatives of the Korean Students Association in Ottawa to say a few remarks.
On behalf of the Korean community at College University, we would like to extend our sincere thanks for your contributions in the Korean War, and to show our appreciation, we have prepared little gifts for you.
They prepared presents for other veterans as well.
Didn't get away.
Okay, thank you very much. So this concludes our first Embassy Speaker Series. Thank you very much for coming. Please join us. Please join us in the hall for the dinner reception. And for further